Okay, so I think my job could probably start and stop with the question to you, Peter. Why a computer? What were you anticipating from it?
Well, thank you for the question. That's very sweet. Any architect or any human being that can remember what he or she was doing 30 years ago or 35 years ago or even yesterday is making up a story, because we really, as you all know, we don't really know what we're doing, we just do it. So I'm going to make up a story about what I think I was doing, which is totally fictitious, but it is, I think, worth telling. The time 1450 was a very unsettled time in Europe. It was the beginning of the possibility of Western humanism and the beginning of a consciousness about what the relationship between man, the subject, and the object architecture was about. Prior to that time, there was a condition which I would call a transcendental metaphysic. That is, the relationship between objects were not between subjects, human subjects and objects, but with some godlike being who mediated between the subject and object. Around the middle of the 15th century, that mediation changed, and proto-humanism, which is what we're talking about, came into being, which suggested that the relationship between subject and object, that metaphysical relationship, was immanent, that is, within the possibility of subject and object. And with that came a consciousness of disciplinarity, of the need for discipline. And of course, the important architect in this case, who is analogous to the situation that we find ourselves in today, and therefore this is not really a history lesson, but a lesson in thinking about answering Greg's question, why the computer? Alberti did several things. He wrote 2 or 3 books, at least 4 maybe, 2 or 3, but I only read 2 or 3. Did 3 or 4 buildings, and set up for me the possibility of an immanent metaphysic as an architectural idea, which today we are still having a problem with. Alberti was the first person to articulate a concept of space. Before that, there was no concept in either painting, drawing, etc. It was probably in geometry and physics, but not in architecture. So he conceived of an idea of space. And a second thing that he thought was important was a concept of authorship. In other words, he watched Brunelleschi sit out on a job, the Duomo, for 48 years, and he realized that wasn't for him. So he had to find a way to make him not only the author of the idea, but the author of the project itself, because that was a very important thing. So he found a notational system, an indexical system, whereby he could project onto flat paper notations which would allow him to take those notations to a builder, and the builder would, in fact, make the same ideas that he was making in his studio in model form. So therefore, the idea of authorship and the idea of space was very important conceptually to Alberti. The space that Alberti, however, conceptualized was what one would call homogeneous space. In other words, it was basically flat. It didn't have much interior articulation, but this was all he could conceptualize in 1450. My argument in answer to Greg would be that everything that follows from Alberti to the present is an attempt to overcome the metaphysical project, and it's become exaggerated in the latter half of the 20th century with French post-structuralist thought, zeroing in on the fact that everything else had been overcome but the metaphysical project. And therefore, many people like Gilles Deleuze, Jacques Derrida, and others became very interested in architecture precisely because it was the last remaining bastion of the metaphysical project. Now, instead of being a good thing, what Alberti did was still something that stood in the way of progress, let's say, or whatever we want to call it. What you find in architects that followed from Alberti, like Bramante, Michelangelo, Peruzzi, Celio, Palladio, etc., attempts to overcome one homogeneous space and to overcome the idea of organism, which was another thing that Alberti put forward, that is, a part relates to the whole. A house is a small city, a city is a large house, the relationship of scale of things, many things that were put forward and crystallized from Alberti to Bramante then became the object of critique. Switch to today, and you say that what are the problems? In other words, why are we using computers? Why are we using the digital? 90% of people who are using computers have no idea what the discourse is about in terms of what should they be doing. Because their teachers don't know, most architects don't know, and I don't know. That's why I don't teach design, because it's an impossibility, and I don't know anything about computers. So between the two, we're in good shape. The thing is that a computer gives you a facility, but doesn't give you an idea. And the real question is, we were talking about it last night at dinner, whether the saw was invented and so we made tables because we could saw wood, or we needed a table so we invented the saw. And so the real question is, do we have digital phenomena because we are something that we can't do by hand or by other means? Or do we have the digital phenomena and then invent things to do with it? I have the feeling that the latter is what we're dealing with in the contemporary world, that we have this computer that has all this possibility and we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, so we make poo-poo, images, designs, surfaces, pockmarked surfaces, they all look alike to me, and they say, why is this the way it is? Has no reason, it's just that we can do it. Why is it when a person walks by a wall, it changes, moves, makes noises, changes color? Who needs that? Well, because you can do it, people do it. And but it's not solving an epistemological problem, I don't think, etc. That is the problem, the Albertian problem of the metaphysics of presence. So I would argue that the reason to use the computer is multiple, and that is, number one, Alberti was thinking of producing a drawing or a notational system for a single building or a single idea. Today, we can produce multiple ideas. So the computer is a way of producing a multiple. Number two, a computer is a way of producing a different kind of author. Some people call it crowdsourcing. Some people call it the BIM method of involving the client and all kinds of things. Some people call it bottom-up design, and all kinds of ways of rethinking the architect's role in social space. My feeling is that also the computer and the digital can produce heterogeneous space, and something that Alberti couldn't produce. And as a critique of Alberti, the whole idea of a change of authorship, a change of the kind of space, a change in the nature of the object are possibilities of the computer. What I see in computational design is homogeneous, consistent multiples rather than heterogeneous, inconsistent multiples, because people don't know why they should be making heterogeneous or homogeneous multiples as an institutional critique. So that is basically the background, that unless we know why we're using the computer, we shouldn't get near it, unless we have an idea that requires us to do it. I want to add three notations, just general notations, before I finish. One is the idea of archaeology also goes back to the movement from humanism to the Enlightenment. Humanism was a pursuit of the antiquarian, and many people studied Rome, made trips and pilgrimages in late humanism. The movement from humanism to the new environment, let's say, the Enlightenment, was a movement away from the antiquarian to the archaeological. So archaeological immediately suggested a scientific view of the world as opposed to a humanist, nostalgic view of the past. So it's very important that this show is called The Archaeology of the Digital rather than The Antiquarian Digital, number one. Number two, I believe that a distinction has got to be made, which is not explicit in the exhibition, but should be, the difference between form finding, which is what the computation does, and form making. I think that computation must be used for form making as opposed to form finding. And the third thing is that the digital, because of the way it is set up, let's say, has become a haven for two issues. One, a kind of animism that I thought had long ago since disappeared from architectural thinking, that is, where you can produce things like that move in nature, move in architecture. And the second is a digital phenomenology, which Mario Carpa calls digital Darwinism. And I think these are two of the problems of the invocation of the digital today. That is, the phenomenologists have re-entered the world with a storm and have taken over the digital, and by that I mean actually the metaphysics of presence. So going back to the metaphysical project, the digital has become a repository and a bulwark of the metaphysics of presence rather than a critique of that. And so, to me, there has to be a critique of the idea of form finding, a critique of digital Darwinism, of phenomenology, a critique of homogeneous space, a critique of authorship, and if those critiques are possible, then it's okay to go ahead with the digital.
Good.
I hope I answered your question.
Crystal clear. No, crystal clear. So in the Biocentrum, how do you critique homogeneous space?
Well, you know the answer to that question. You're
They
saying
don't?
No, they don't.
Well, I could give the answer, but I think it's better if you do.
The whole idea in the biocentrum, and one of the models, the brown models, the big brown model as opposed to the little brown model.
Can we get a big brown model on the screen?
Well,
Because we got
it doesn't matter.
Well, no, but they don't know what a big brown model is. Yeah, that one.
That one.
Yeah.
The interesting issue there is not the writing of script or of code or coding the specific forms. There's nothing to do with those forms. It has to do with the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous space. If you have a datum plane that's ground level, table level, or whatever, that is ground zero, you're going to begin as a datum with homogeneous space because a datum requires homogeneity to be a datum. What's interesting about the biocentrum is that we eluded that datum by projecting things down into the ground and projecting things up out of the ground to start with, number one. So the sectional movement between ground zero and minus ground and plus ground becomes very important. What makes it heterogeneous is that when we're carving away ground, the volume, the void, is acting as a plus vector. When we are adding to solid, that is plus figure, let's say, we're removing void, which becomes a minus vector, where solid becomes positive. So at below zero level, the void is plus and the ground or the solid is minus. Above zero, the ground, the solid is plus and the void is minus. When you have the void being both plus and minus and the solid being both plus and minus, you can't have homogeneous space, you have heterogeneous space. So that is the project that, as I saw it. And the forms are meaningless. So in other words, if you just look flat at the drawings, if you don't know how to articulate, and the computer can't do that for you, no matter how many times you push the button, it can't do it. It needs someone to say, we need to find a way to make heterogeneous space as opposed to homogeneous space. That's what an architect does. And that's what is interesting about this project is, in fact, it does it in spades. And all the rest of it doesn't matter. It's surface decoration. The really interesting thing is making voids positive. And to make voids positive, you're doing something that architecture can do, which no other discipline can do.
And
you think they understood that?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, with that and that, I think it's
Yeah,
clear.
okay.
And previous projects,
All right.
and I'm not positive about this,
But go ahead.
but we're using palimpsest or what at the time I remember was being called base drawings, which had a different historical connotation and also combined different figures.
Right.
And I remember around this time, a lot of people using Xerox machines and also computers to make complicated base drawings. But then they would read them like Colin Rowe and Fred Coder,
Right.
like figure ground.
Figure ground. This project, even though we're talking about void and solid, is a critique of the homogeneity of the figure ground dialectic. So my break with Colin Rowe comes precisely at this point. Previous to this time, we were doing palimpsests, which were traces of former buildings, let's say, in the 18th century, 19th century, etc. We were layering the ground itself, that is the ground datum, with a certain kind of metaphysical capacity. Here, for the first time, we were doing it in 3 dimensions. In the other projects, it was always ground down as a series of layers. There was no figure in it. And the way the interesting issue is, how do you make figure without making figure ground? In other words, how do you make figure figure or ground ground? Whereas figure figure is both plus and minus, and ground ground is plus and minus. How do you do that? And you don't need a computer to do that. You need an idea how to do that.
Okay. But you also used a computer to do that. Coincidentally.
Coincidentally. You know, because I mean, you're being disingenuous, that you knew at the time you were overdrawing computer drawings, and you could draw as fast as the computer, and it was much better that what you were doing than what the computer was doing.
Well, I was humming this John Henry song to myself the whole time.
Yeah.
And you know how that song ends.
No, I don't.
So John Henry, the Steel Driving Man?
Yeah. How does it end?
They make a machine that lays track.
Yeah.
John Henry says, I can beat the machine.
Right.
Goes over a mountain and beats the machine by one length of track and dies of a heart attack. So I really felt like this was the automation of something.
But Greg, it doesn't matter how fast one is going in life to keep up with I don't know what.
No, I disagree. I think the fact that the two were calibrated so that you could see what was going on was very important. I think now that the machine is so much faster than you can draft, makes it very difficult to formulate a project like not doing figure ground. I mean, personally, I believe the speed of the digital and the speed of the...
The question is, does the Albertian problematic that I laid out of authorship, of homogeneous space, of part to whole, of notation, is it a project of critique today that's important, or should we just go on making funny shapes and do that?
No, well, it's... Okay, so 3 days ago we were at Yale.
Right.
And I heard, let's generalize and say the entire junior faculty.
Right.
You know, Brennan.
Go ahead.
Everybody. It became a joke. I mean, they were laughing at themselves because every review they would say, eliminate the hierarchy, vary the components, and make the variation gradient, grade 8. So make everything different in a series and eliminate.
That's the multiple, inconsistent multiple.
Yeah. And every single faculty member, that was all they could tell every single student.
But do they know why they're doing that?
Well, I think because the computer's really good at doing that.
No, but why were they suggesting that kids should do that? That's the issue.
Because they know how to use a computer to do
but
that.
that's not the reason.
Well,
I'm trying to give another reason.
I understand.
They may end up in the same place, but I'm saying is that the idea of an inconsistent multiple may produce heterogeneous space without anybody necessarily moving it up and down, or there are many ways to produce what I consider heterogeneous space. I mean, Palladio, I think, as a critique of Alberti, was the first one to do this. Bramante didn't. He was doing figure ground. But Palladio found a way, and why I think he's very important, to do heterogeneous space by spatial manipulation. Let me make sure we bring it up to date. I would argue that all of the people making computerized drawings, right, they're doing it for technological reasons. They don't have an idea that the computer can do X as opposed to Y. Because if you look at all the work, even the work of Carl Schuh, who's a big computer guy, I told Carl, it's all homogeneous space. Why is it that, and every building that Norman Foster does, et cetera, is layers and layers and layers of homogeneous space? I'm saying, we've already been there. Why do we need to do that again? Or Renzo Piano. Take all of the heroes of today are all making homogeneous space because they haven't a critical idea of why they're doing what they're doing. That's the key reason to use the computer, if it can become a critical instrument then it's fine. If it's just an instrument of production, then it's just a tool.
Yep. Okay, well, it's the thesis of this show and the whole series that we're premiating certain projects because they have an idea about the digital technology, and I think you've outlined very clearly what you brought into it and how you directed it with a vision other than just using the tool for the sake of the tool.
Okay,
But
you're going to have trouble in your next two shows.
well, we may.
I mean, I'm just saying is I would warn you that I think to find 20 more monkeys that can perform what you would like them to perform is going to be really hard.
No, we're good. We're good.
You good with 20? Okay. Norman Foster?
I don't think he's in that 20.
Okay.
But we're not talking about the 20 yet because we don't have a final.
Okay.
But if you can remember back, what worried you about the computer? I mean, what worried you about the digital? It's clear what you wanted to do with it. Was there anything that you found problematic?
Yeah, the conundrum for me, I mean,
And really,
confession time.
Don't think now, think
no,
back
no,
then.
No, confession time now and then.
All right.
I was against authorial expressionism. So what I was interested in is the fact that we could produce authorship without expressionism, right? That it was an inherent condition of the process of computation, let's say. What worries me today is I look at the computer work and I say, where is the author? So here's the guy who was one in the forefront of rallying against authorial expressionism, asking where the author is. So the problematic, and I don't know the answer to that because I keep saying to my wife and my people in my office, I was about a different kind of author, and I said, could you please explain what you mean by that? And then my mind goes blank. But I don't know what that different author is. And that has always bothered me about not whether we could produce heterogeneous space or et cetera, is the role of the author. I mean, in other words, who makes the judgments as to this or that, and what are they based on? And they're not based on anything in computation. Mm-hmm. So I think it's still a huge problem, and I'm a top-down guy. I don't believe in BIM, and I certainly don't think architecture can be anything but top-down. The only comfort I have when I work with large teams, large communities, I always put in the contract, we have the final say as to whether it's A or B. And if you don't put that in your contract, you've got a problem. Mm-hmm. And what I love about architecture is there is ultimately some authorial control, and that is, control is very different than power. I have always distinguished between power and control. I have not much power, I have enormous control. And I control everything I do. That's why I get nervous being here, because I'm not in control of what's happening where I need to be. I think that's a good thing.
So in everything you've ever done,
yeah.
Houses,
right.
Wexner, there's always a sense of, and you use the word with Alberti, instructions and notations.
Correct.
Would you see that as something that's pretty seamless through pre-digital, digital to today, or do you think that's changed?
No, I think that's changed. It's not seamless at all. I mean, it's much more difficult with, let's take Santiago, mm-hmm. and the way we took the diagrams of control into the digital, right? And it's an elaborate digital project, and who knows whether it's right or wrong, according to what the original idea was. I certainly don't know. The reason that I know it's out of control is when I go there, I say, wow, that's fantastic. How'd they do that? And somebody said, well, you did that. And of course, I didn't do that. And I quite like the feeling, the frisson of seeing things that I certainly, they happened. And
But
so
that's because of the complexity, or that's because you can't trace back the process?
it's because I don't know why they are the way they are. They're happy accidents. Let's say they're not controlled. And when you get into large-scale projects and complex algorithms and scripting, let's say, you cannot control. You can set up the process, but that's about it. And I think then that's a good thing. I feel the loss of that, then I really believe I'm the author that I was looking for. That is the out-of-control author who sees the supposedly authorial nature of his work and says, I didn't do that, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. So that may be the description of the author I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you were uniquely prepared for a certain approach to these technologies because you would run operations, take a cube, divide it in 8, mm-hmm. shift, delete 1/8, shift again, move them on a 9-square grid-like mm-hmm. module. And those operations were operations that you could rewind, replay, rewind, change and replay. I mean, that's what in digital technology you would call procedural operations or Boolean operations.
Yeah. But I would argue that I would say the lesson of Colin Rowe putting me in front of a Palladian villa and say, you sit there and look at that villa until you can tell me something about it that you mm-hmm. can't see.
Right.
And to me, having that experience for 2 years or 3 years, at a certain point, combine that with the procedural conditions, and you have something else.
Right.
That's what I would argue. So you can't have that one without the other.
No, I agree. No, I'm just saying that
I want to make sure that it's clear, because to me, I think it's necessary to go and sit in front of a Rosso Fiorentino deposition in Volterra for an hour and not move, not sketch or make notations or anything. Just sit and look, because if you don't know how to see what's in the painting, other than there are millions of depositions, but this particular painting is a stunner, you don't know how to see architecture. Mm-hmm. And what makes, to me, great architecture is architects who know how to see space, time, surface, etc., and are trained to see like that. And to me, what's important for this audience is that experience, and then to follow it with using the tools. Because I think if you have an hour in front of Rosso, and then you say, okay, take the computer, what are you going to do with it, right? How are you going to make something that is equal to it? I find it difficult to tell you how you would do that with a computer.
Okay, well, here's a kind of a nightmare scenario for you, which is Chris Yesios was not working with you on the project altruistically. He was clearly watching how you were working, learning how the design process operated, and integrating that into Form Z.
Okay.
I think with Frank with Digital Project.
Yeah.
He took his working method, mm-hmm. turned it into software, I know I've had Bob McNeil in my office numerous times looking at how we work, and 6 months later it's in Rhino. So I don't think we inherit this stuff from the outside. I think a certain amount of it gets built into the tools, and I think a certain amount of your process, for sure, got built into Form Z.
But fine.
Okay.
I said, do you think, since we have only 15 minutes, that they...
Is that right?
That
Wow.
we
Open it
should
up?
open it, turn the lights up and see if they're... I mean, because I think it would really be...
I got one more question before I let them ask, so.
yeah, why don't we have the lights come up, if that's possible?
What's your position on curves and surfaces?
Like, give me a range of answers. What do you mean?
Wexner, Biocentrum, Carnegie Mellon, Cincinnati.
First of all, I'm interested in space, not surface.
Got it.
Okay? So I'm interested in what's inside of a surface and the inside layer of a surface as it is affected by the space, rather than the outside surface, which I don't control necessarily. Okay? So to me, that's one way of looking at surface. In other words, I'm interested in inboard corners as opposed to outboard corners, right? What happens when, Now, Richard Serra would argue that he dislikes Frank's museum in Bilbao because his sculptures, his rhombuses and whatever they are, toruses, etc., demand cornered space to play against. And there's no corners in Frank's space. So Richard would argue that he conceptualizes the external space around his sculptural curved objects as rectilinear, right? As a play between a rectilinear space. He says he needs rectilinear space. That's Richard Serra. I don't know how else to answer the question.
Okay. And
I know what you were doing. You were setting me up.
No, I'm not.
No. That I like right angles as opposed to curves.
No, I think you like curves. I think you just like curves that go doink, 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 not whoosh.
Yeah, I don't like, no, that's right. I don't like smooth.
No, I mean, working with you and talking with you and being with you, looking at work, you make a lot of noises like boink, boink, doink,
That's
doink,
right.
that kind of stuff.
That's right.
You never go like that.
No, it's true, never. No, I don't go shh. It's the difference, I guess, between smooth and striated.
Okay.
Should we have questions? Yeah.
Randomness. What do you think about randomness? What you described, and maybe the project, the model we saw up there, and the way the algorithm appears to have been set up for the Biocentrum, right, was to sort of run a bunch of iterations and be maybe surprised by the result and be able to sort of appreciate and understand what the result is. But it seems like the randomness of the iteration was actually, a crucial, like it was maybe the key part of it in a way. And,
Okay.
But I don't know.
So I agree with you.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate?
No, I mean, first of all, I didn't think there was an algorithm, number one. The algorithm was the DNA chain, let's say, that we took the strings, and instead of the double helix, we made the scientific notation rather than the scientific image. So we took that notation and ran it to produce the kind of possibility of there's no randomness actually. It only seems random. It's very controlled. Random would have been, oh, we don't like this guy here, let's go over there. And we didn't do that. We just took it as it was. You would say, what?
Somebody go run that again so that thing goes over there.
Did we do that?
Yeah, that's why you're an author.
That's what randomness is. Then the question is, why did I want that thing over there?
No, because it was too figure ground, or it was,
Was
too much of a spine.
Too much something else. Yeah. Okay. I'm cool with that.
No, because he's the one that's asking you trick questions. Because
I'm glad you're cool with it.
there's
I
an
didn't.
assumption that the computer is a black box that makes happy accidents. And I think that's your question, is how comfortable are
The
you?
computer didn't make any happy accidents.
Yeah.
I don't think. But I'm interested in randomness, you know. I'm interested in the arbitrary. And of course, my great fight with my friend Rafael Moneo, who is very much against the arbitrary, is precisely at that point we split. The possibility of the arbitrary is the possibility of heterogeneous, inconsistent multiples to me, but nevertheless. Any other, we must have, you all can't be quiet for this long without, there we go.
Excuse me. I was just curious if maybe the digital is causing people to sort of question that Alberti's metaphysical project, you know, in a way. Like, is it really so important to create heterogeneous space? Do we somehow, have we come like full circle to a point where now we can think through and actually calculate the origins of our design decisions and use those directly as opposed to trying to mediate them through a coded language? Or, you know, I just feel like, yeah, maybe you can speak about that a bit.
Well, we've come full circle. I still think the problematic of what Alberti did, which was thought to be positive in the proto-humanist environment of 1450, still haunts us. I think that the metaphysical project has been one, especially as reiterated by Kant and Hegel and Heidegger, etc., has been a philosophical problem that seems to have occupied late 20th century thinkers for quite a while. And since those thinkers believe that the locus of the metaphysics of presence, that is, the problematic, is most redolent in architecture, is why many of these people came to architecture to see if they could solve the problem. Most architects don't see it as a problem at all, because that's what they are, metaphysicians of presence. And so if you don't see it as a problem, we're back before 1450. For me, it is the problem, along with phenomenology of presence, which is the metaphysics of presence, along with the idea of representation, the sign-signified relationship, when Derrida argues that there is no fixed relationship between sign and signified, which is traditional in Saussurean linguistics. This is a great breakthrough, a free-floating signified, that there is no transcendental signified in the Derridian system, which scientists in terms of the universe are talking about. There may not be a beginning. What is before the beginning? There may be no value to origin. So if we come full circle, maybe that's all right, because there is no value in coming full circle. So I think those are the issues which intrigue me, which cause me to go outside of architecture and read strange things that have that I then analogously relate to the kinds of problems I'm working on. And I don't think solving a housing project, you know, if you said, hey, Peter, we got a 15-story housing block we'd like you to do, and there's so many constraints to being able to do anything but, design a facade that you say, oh, okay, I happen to be building one in Milan right now. Greg and I might differ as to its nature, but I think there are very few opportunities to, as an architect, to exercise ideas that are critical ideas to the discipline. And if I had to give you a definition of architecture, which I think is important, to me, architecture is the possibility of a cultural imprint in the society, which also imprints internally to the discipline of architecture. Just imprinting into the society is not enough. If it doesn't do both, it's not architecture, it's building. And I make that distinction. And I would challenge most people that I don't believe are at all interested in the internal imprinting and are only interested in the external one. And therefore, for me, there's very little architecture.
Could we take a last question?
We can take two more.
Okay.
Okay, I want one though, because you took a shot at me that I want to.
I took it. Where?
I'll tell you.
Oh my God! Well, you're so sensitive. I didn't.
Just attentive.
Attentive. I took a shot.
So, thank you. I wanted to come back to the beginning. You talked about your distaste for animism and its relationship to the metaphysics of presence. And in a way, this is a question that could also go to Greg, because I want to come back maybe to your feelings about his work in animate form. So I'm curious about how you would think about a non-humanist perspective for architecture that didn't fall into animism in the way you're critiquing it.
I'm not interested in non-humanism, number one. I think the humanist project evolved into the scientific project, let's say, the Enlightenment project. It evolved into the mechanical project. It evolved into the modernist project. It evolved into the postmodernist project. My project, which I believe is also an important, you must have a project, it seems to me, or aspire to a project, is not anti-humanist at all. It's merely saying, hey, what are the problematics that we still have inherited from humanism? One is the metaphysical project, which was important in 1450 to instantiate away from the transcendental. We don't worry about that anymore, but we still must worry about the immanent metaphysic that we assume. So I think we're between paradigms. And what makes it interesting in 1450 to today, they were between the Gothic, the Greek, the Roman, and the humanist. We are between the modernist, the postmodernist, the parametric, and something else, the proto-something else. And I don't know what that is, but I would like to think that you all will find it sometime in your being. And you want to take me out for a peg.
I'm not taking you out at all.
Okay,
no,
go ahead.
No, I just realized you snuck in a thing, which was you said the digital is a haven for animism and phenomenology.
I believe that.
I think your exact words.
That's right.
And I took that personally because I'm interested in all kinds of motion. I mean, I realize...
I know you are, but I didn't mean it for you.
Okay. No, I'm just saying, I just want to ask you to think about the fact that all four projects approach not being static in different ways. I think Chuck, most obviously, his project is not about stasis, it's about literal movement. Mm-hmm. I think Shoei Yo's project is about visualizing stress, putting surfaces under stress and building them under stress. Mm-hmm. I think Frank has talked a lot about the fact that he's into Baroque motion and forms that have drapery and, So how is the biocentrum, is it in stasis for you, or is it dynamic?
I have to take a mulligan on that. I haven't a clue.
Because there's
You want an answer, but I see there's certain questions I don't know how to answer.
But you spent 10 years working on presentness and thinking about how to imbue an object with timeliness that has to do with both its
Throwing it off kilter, but not necessarily literal motion.
Okay.
But throwing it off of zero.
Yeah.
Okay? In time and in space, off zero. No longer zero. That doesn't mean it literally starts to go around and
I'm
around.
not saying that's what you're interested in.
What?
I think it goes doink, doink, doink.
It goes doink, doink, doink. But it may go doink forward, doink backward, doink this way. I mean, there's no direction. And therefore, I don't know why. Do you think I care that the roof of our stadium goes...
No, but I think you care that it goes doink, 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 doink.
That's right. I do care about that.
Yeah. No, but I think that your language of non-static has always been positional, trace, and intersection of these elements. I think that is very germane to operate.
I think that's different than animism or phenomenology. I know the sort of nature boys. I mean, your boy, Francois Roche, is an animist.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a different, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
No, that's not you.
No, no, for sure. And I'm happy that he's not necessarily in the show. Maybe he comes the next. He's coming. Oh boy. That's why I say you're going to have a tough time with that 20. I would argue that he's not an architect, that he isn't even architecture neutral. He is hostile to the discourse that I'm talking about. And that is...
That's why he's in the show. Because believe me, a lot of people say the same thing about you. That you're architecture hostile.
You can quote them, but who are those people? Who?
Rafa Mineo.
Mineo. Oh, okay. Well, we've already finished with
Leon Creer.
Leon Creer. Okay. Yeah. Well, those are two of my buddies. I got to be careful with the people. Huh? Yeah. You hang around with some strange guys. I mean, one more question. It's not the last question, but it's just one more. Yeah, there's got to be someone. There's somebody who wants to have a question.
My niece, who I love deeply, couldn't come this afternoon because she's studying for exams tomorrow and Friday. She's still studying because we had maple tree spring last spring.
I don't know what he's saying.
Her niece wishes she was here, but she's doing her exams.
Okay.
Because we had maple spring last year. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Protests about costs of tuition and...
Yeah, fine. I think...
What I mean is she would be here if she was a regular year.
Yeah, no. So...
Okay, my question.
Yes.
Which book should I tell her to read to open her mind? About architecture. She's studying architecture.
There's a catalog coming out.
No. There's... No, not Mulligan. No, I don't want a Mulligan on that one. I would read Remembrance of Things Past. I would give her the 12-volume edition. You can get it out at a used bookstore in Montreal at a very cheap price, and she can take it with her around. It's a beautiful gift, the Modern Library edition, and have her read that. And that would be the best thing she could do this summer, right? No architecture at all. that would go for anybody here. Go get Proust and read it. And you'll know more about space and time. It's all about space and time, the book, the 12 volumes. Okay, we got to go.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Good luck.